Hey everybody, welcome to episode 74 of the Is That Normal podcast, and it is good to be back. We've had a little break.
It is. We are glad to be here and got some exciting things to share today, and in the future we got some great episodes coming up. But so, to start off today though, Randall, have you seen the new trailer that just came out a week or so ago for Stranger Things Season 4?
I have not, actually.
Okay.
So
Yes.
I'm not caught up on Stranger Things yet. So
Okay.
So I haven't seen the trailer, but
Yeah.
I've heard the buzz.
So my house is a big thing. My kids are super excited. They're big Stranger Things fans, and and they're really a little bummed because they have this trailer and they say coming in 2022, and we're like,
Yeah.
what? We thought it was gonna be this fall, So, but anyway, at least we know it's still out there
Yes.
and that it's on its way. So you said you're not caught up. Have you watched the show?
I have
at all?
watched exactly, maybe 2 episodes of it.
Okay.
And we started it, and it was one of those that we had a lot of other shows going on, and we just never continued. And I think I was starting to get my interest peaked, but I don't think I got quite far enough into it to like completely get hooked where it's like, then you got to binge all of it.
Right.
So it is definitely on my list of ones that I want to go back to and catch up, which that's kind of been my nature anyway. With shows like that I like to be able to start later because then you can go and you can just watch it all
Yeah.
and catch up instead of having to wait.
And it is interesting. I try to vary that actually personally for myself. There's some shows I'm like, ooh, let's watch this as it comes out, so we have to wait a week.
Yeah.
And then there's some things there's like, I'm not touching that until it's all out there, so I can just
Yes.
hammer through it as fast as I want.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. We kind of try to balance that.
Especially a lot of those
house.
shows that have a lot of details that kind of are threaded through.
Yes.
To me, I love the benefit of being able to watch those where you don't, some of those things that you miss when a period of time passes
you
from
almost
the
have to go
previous
back and
episode.
watch the last episode again, and then no, I totally get that. And so just to catch everybody up just a little bit, so Stranger Things is they've had 3 seasons. It's a Netflix original, so you can only watch it really if you have Netflix to stream it. When it comes out, it does come out episodic, so you have to kind of wait.
Yeah.
So we've done that, I think, with at least 2 of the seasons as a family. Kind of watched it as it came out, so it's really aimed a little younger than us, so it's a teen, tween, really kind of probably the target market. So for you not to have watched it, that's probably not abnormal. But I know for my kids, it's been one of the first TV shows my older kids connected over. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So it's this show about these kids who are like teenagers, and they're the main characters, and they've got a big friend group. And it's just very appealing for my kids. And so as they started asking about watching it, it does have some scary horror elements in it. We made the decision that I'd watch it together. And so my 3 oldest kids and I, we watched this show mostly together. And so today I want to talk about why I chose to do that.
Well, as we said, welcome to the Is That Normal podcast, where really our goal is to help equip parents of teens and young adults to lead their kids towards Christ. And so today, we talked about Stranger Things. So help us figure out, what does Stranger Things have to do with that?
Right. So I'm not going to give you the gospel according to Stranger Things and tell you all the Christ allusions throughout the story. So it's definitely nothing like that. And actually, there's some kind of big problems with some of the cultural worldview of the show. And so again, we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. And that's really one of the reasons I asked to watch it with my kids, is so I could help them navigate some of those things.
So would you recommend the show?
I definitely, because of some of the worldview issues, there's a little bit of language in it, and then there's some some horror issues, like that's got a scary movie. I definitely wouldn't recommend it for under teenagers, 13. It's probably if it was a movie, it'd be a PG-13 movie probably. So I definitely would recommend it younger than that, and I wouldn't even particularly tell you need to go out and watch that and get caught up. That that may not be your story. If you haven't watched it to this point, you may not be a Stranger Things fan, because it's kind of one of those things, if you've not already caught on for the reasons that we've caught on, then you might not be one catching on. But I would recommend you and that's really what I want to talk about today, is connecting with and engaging your children over things they're interested in. And that's really, at the base of all this, why I navigated this with my children. I enjoyed it myself personally. I'll tell you some of that too here in a minute. But so there's this obvious need to filter content for our kids. And there's different ways to handle it, and that's a whole nother episode. But this is the way I chose to do it in this situation: is I'll watch this with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are some of those connection points that you talk about?
Well, there's just this pull of cultural interest. So, Randall, I've long, we've dealt with youth for a long time. I've been in a youth group, and one of the things we've done, I read a lot of books about culture. I try to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on with music and media and stuff. But it has gotten so large and varied and individualized, like it's so hard to keep up, but my kids do, like they have this like secret code language that they talk in of all the things that they know about that don't have anything to do with TV or movies or music. It's all like social media this or social media that. So your kids are being influenced by culture, and there's a huge draw to be in the know, like that fear of missing out. That FOMO, that's a big deal. And kids want to make sure they're in the know on the biggest, best happening things. And so there's a pull. And so when Stranger Things came out, like if you weren't in Stranger Things, like you were nobody, in that culture. Like it was what everybody talked about. It's a big deal. And so they had this huge draw to be pulled into that. And, and kids are curious and they want to know and they want to check things out. And at our house, we've tried to create a culture of open discussion. Yeah. Again, we talk about that a lot, like being able to ask good questions, trying to have a safe space. And so I'd rather my kids come and talk to me about things, share things with me, show things to me that they might know I don't agree with or whatever, so we can have a discussion about it rather than, if I just tell my older kids, younger kids, it's a little different, but as they get into these teenage and especially as young adults, if you just say no because I said no and I'm the parent, you're asking for rebellion and pushback and them going to their friend's house and doing it anyway. So, I mean, if they want to do this, they're going to do it. And so I'd rather have an open discussion for us to consider it. Yeah. Sometimes it still needs to be a no after the discussion. But in this case, we discussed it and I said, well, let's check that out together. Yeah. And so that was kind of our decision there.
So what did you find when you watched it?
There's a lot of good things I enjoyed, but some of the big things, just as far as what we talked about and what I've pulled out of it, coming away from it, is it really speaks to young people's and all of our need to look for a connection to something bigger than us. Like, it's one of the things that Stranger Things is praised for or talked about often is the nostalgia factor. So you've got it's set in the 80s. I mean, there's the video arcades and movie rental stores and malls and all their glory, and then you've got them. They're pulling in these actors from famous 80s movies. So Sean Astin's in there. He became famous from the Goonies, and then went on to have a career. And Winona Ryder's in there. Paul Reiser. I mean, you've got these people that's like, oh, this makes me feel like I'm back in the 80s, and music and cars are from the 80s, and so there's that. But there's also this fantastic story about this supernatural stuff going on. But it's set in a setting that even if you didn't live through it, somehow they've managed to make these cultural nostalgia points. So it makes us feel like we're living this mundane life, but I know there's something more out there. And so we have this like big pull of that spiritual reality. And the other point that kind of leads into is in that spiritual reality, we all realize that we need a savior. And, at the foundation of this story is this basic struggle of good and evil. And the heroes or the main characters turn out to be this group of like 13-year-olds. They grow up through the show a little bit, but, when they start, they're like 13 years old and they're smarter than the adults and they're saving the world. And what kid doesn't want to watch a show about like 13-year-olds saving the world and being superheroes? I mean, without special powers, there's a little bit of special powers in there. But one of the problems is just that point. Is this belief that whatever struggle we face, if we're good enough and strong enough and capable enough, or have the right tools, that we can be our own savior, and it's just really not true. We, no matter how good people are or how talented they are, we aren't enough to measure up to God's standard, let alone to always do the right thing. Yeah. And so as we watch these flawed characters be better and stronger because they believe in themselves, it creates this dangerous temptation to think, well, I should be able to do that too. Yeah. And that's just not true. So, so we spent time talking about the characters, there's really good character development in it, like really well done. But realize that some of that's realistic, but some of that wasn't realistic, and helping my kids discern where those spots were. So
Yeah. So what else do you think's made this franchise so popular? Because it's like,
yeah,
even if for me, having not watched the whole thing, it's almost impossible to be not socially aware that it exists and that it's a huge phenomenon.
It's well acted, it's well written, it's very well produced. I mean, it's just really good film. For a guy who loves film and watching movies and loves stories, it's good. I as far as from that standpoint, it's as good as anything I've ever watched. Like, the character development's very complex and the storyline's very non-cliche, and I mean, it's just really good. And so I think that's part of it. But then there's all these references and nods, like we said, to films of the past. Like, there's actually, they'll pull little clips of lines out of movies and slip them in there. And if you're like an Easter egg nerd, you'll kind of catch those things. And then there's all the 80s, which, Randall, did you know the 80s are back in fashion?
Yes, the 80s and the 90s, which is just
So cars, mullets, and crazy colored clothes.
So for those of us that hung on to our clothes from back then,
it's happening. Actually, I saw my son, if he's listening to this, he'll hate me, but he had tight rolled jeans on today, with socks showing, and white tennis shoes. I was like, that is the most 80s 90s thing.
And just to throw in some personality, he had on socks that had pink cows on them. I don't know if you realize that on top of it, but yes. So.
Yes, which may have been his sister's socks, now that I think about that. But anyway, but that's all okay. So, but but all of that being said, I think the greatest reason is just the fact that everything is spiritual, and this show addresses that.
Yeah.
And, we're created as eternal spiritual beings, in mortal bodies. And it creates this tension, and we know it, and we long for eternity, we long for the supernatural, and we hope and seek for something more. And this show gives a very interesting, exciting, and scientific answer to some of those things, and so that's compelling and intriguing. But the thing is, there's no balance. There's this evil that's coming from another dimension and ruining everything, but the only thing it balances is a bunch of teenagers. And that's just not the way life really is. I know I love sciencey stuff, and when they were doing the Large Hadron Collider, and they were looking for the Higgs boson over in Europe, I was really fascinated by that, because one of the things that they did that for was because they discovered with certain reactions there was matter that was lost, and they called it antimatter, but something had to balance that. And so as they started doing math and equations, they realized that in their Newtonian physics, if there wasn't something that is not in this dimension or tangible world balancing all the matter here, everything's wrong. With their math, it doesn't match up. So they were looking for this antimatter particle that they called the God particle, because the only thing that can balance everything in our life and everything that we think of, and evil and all of that, is God. He's the only counterbalance. And so if we leave him out of the equation, everything's going to implode on itself like a black hole.
So not everybody is maybe a Stranger Things fan or has watched it, or maybe they say, hey, that's not really just for me. But what are some of the transferable principles maybe from what you've observed from it?
Yeah, I think it's really easy. I think, first of all, you find out what your kids love. If you don't know what your kids love, then you don't really have a relationship with your kids. And I mean, you need to know, what your kids are watching, listening to, interested in, reading if you can get them to read. What are they excited about? What are their hobbies? What are their interests? And that takes time, and that takes listening. You can't just go in and say, okay, write me a list of your 5 favorite things. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Well, show me about that. Well, tell me about that. What do you love about that? So it's a process of drawing that out of them. I know for every one of my kids, when they hit about 13, every bit of information I get out of them, I'm having to so tell me one more thing about that. So it's hard work, but we have to do that. And then when you do that, then start looking for those talking points. And don't, again, I don't think this is a lecture moment. There's lecture moments. This isn't one. It's not you're listening to that. What's wrong with you? Let's go, slow down, take a breath. Just say, well, what do you like about that? Well, what do you think about when they say this? What do you think about their belief on this? What do you think? How about the language they're using? Whatever it is, let them discover the worldview of that person through your lens of helping them discern that.
Yeah.
And then maybe you can interject well, you know that this is what, you know, we believe, and, you know, this is what the Bible says, and this is what God says, and this is what Jesus called us to do. How do you think that matches up, you know? And so just create those moments of discussion. And it's easier to do when you just watch an episode and you're like, that was awesome. You see that whole building explode, and man, wasn't that part great? I love that part. I love that part. What do you think about that part? Well, what do you think about this thing that happened? That kind of concerned me. Well, I thought that was out of character, or I thought that was out of line, or was that very realistic? And so it gives you that natural place to have that discussion. And then just really at the bottom of it, just do things with them that they love.
Yeah.
Even if you don't love it necessarily, it's so valuable, and they're going to remember that always, that you sat down and played blocks with them when they were a kid, when they were little, or Barbies, or whatever it was that they want to play, or that you engage in the things they loved when they were a teenager with them.
And, you know, I know you've talked about it before on this podcast. You know, I've even experienced that to a point of this really unique thing happens when you show some genuine interest in, you know, what I'm specifically talking about teenagers, you know, my experience as far as what are they interested in, but then you start asking those questions of why, because there's a lot of things, you know, like you said, how broad of a spectrum of things there are out there.
My kids are all watching Japanese anime like nuts right now. Like anytime I'm driving somewhere suddenly, I'm like, wait a minute, I hear Japanese. Like, what is going on? And like I turn on, my kids are like huddled around a phone back there watching anime while I'm driving down the road. It's just
and
how did that happen?
Absolutely. and so it's really easy, you know, I've always, like you said, I've always tried to at least kind of feel like I tried to somewhat stay relevant or keep up to speed on as culture has changed, but boy, it's nearly impossible to do now. Yeah. But and even the things that I have become aware of, some of the things I just, you know, kind of shake my head and I don't understand. But man, there's been some really unique conversations that come out of, you know, showing some interest and then asking, well, what motivates you? Why is that interesting to you? Yeah. Or why is that something that you, you know, you enjoy, or that you're consuming this type of content? And it really does lead to some really unique conversations, and maybe open some doors to some deeper conversations that you would have a hard time just, you know, kind of approaching straight on. Yeah. So it really does open some unique things, and I think it's significant to them for people to show some genuine interest in what's important to them.
When you do that, you make them an expert. When you ask them about themselves and things that they like, and who doesn't like to feel like an expert? Yeah. And so that builds trust and mutual respect, so that you can have then a platform to say, well, okay, well, let me let you see my perspective now that you've told me yours. And
absolutely.
It's really good. Yeah.
So as we wrap up today, our two takeaways is the first, if you're a fan of Stranger Things, to check out the new trailer.
We'll put a link in the notes for it.
Perfect. Yep. Mm-hmm. And then second is to maybe try to find some time to have some spiritually guided discussions about things that your kids live in this week. You know, the things that they're consuming, or the things that are, you know, part of their world, to find some ways in and have some of those maybe deeper spiritually guided conversations this week.
Absolutely. Until then.
All right. Be abnormal.